So in 2014, my son was born with cancer and it was unexpected. I had a normal pregnancy. And what that did, it threw me in a situation which I definitely wasn't used to. I'd been using natural medicine my entire life. I was one of those people who are very stubborn against using any form of Western medicine. I guess was fascist to that point. So to be thrown into a situation where my own son couldn't survive without Western medicine, without having a breathing machine, an incubator, and the whole hospital system kept him alive for months. He was in intensive care for months. He was born with cancer. He had a massive tumor, and he needed chemotherapy at 10 days old, which is really an unbelievable situation for anyone, but for someone who had a degree in natural medicine, Chinese medicine, and had never really used Western medicine herself, I couldn't see uh, how that was going to really work for my son. I was in conflict. I was in conflict the whole time. Anyway, I came up to a situation where just before the chemotherapy, as a lot of newborns need to have their vaccinations, and before the chemotherapy, they said there's a few days where we can still vaccinate. And I remember that feeling of, vaccinations are, I'd built up my own image of them. I was never an anti-vaxxer. I always respected that they were the best, but I was very afraid of the images that I'd created about vaccinations still. And I thought, oh, if you vaccinate him, you're putting him in a vulnerable position because he's just not ready for a Hep B. He's too vulnerable for Hep B vaccination. Now, the nurse, who I really liked at the time, she said, she had to give her opinion in the most respectful way. And she just said, oh, he'll be needing a lot of blood transfusions. And she knew what cancer was about. I didn't. I had no experience at all. And so she was right. He will be needing thousands of blood transfusions. And to not vaccinate in that situation is totally irresponsible. So I'm lucky that I went along with the nurse and I said, oh, yeah, well, let's vaccinate. But I remember that feeling of everything that I'd learned in my life had to be put away because I had to listen to someone else with more experience. But I had all this knowledge which never reframed my perception. Perception doesn't get reframed by information. I was stuck in my stubborn ways of thinking about natural medicine, and it just wasn't going to go away overnight. And so the whole journey for me was really unpeeling layers of, I wouldn't say false information, but just information that at that time was not useful, could even be dangerous if I was to refuse vaccination before chemo. He could never have that again until he was past the chemo, and it would have put him in a vulnerable position, which she was right. But I realized if I'd had a nurse I didn't like, as sometimes we don't like the people we're working with, and I would have been really stubborn about my own beliefs. But because the relationship was so good with this nurse, that's why I went along. And I think that's what reframes perception is relationships. It's not so much one person knows more or knows the right answer or knows better. It's the way that the relationship will soften a person. And it's that softening makes you more open. Because when I think about it, the anti-vaxxer debate is really two stubborn groups of people being stubborn with each other, rather than listening and being soft and saying we're both right. I think pluralism is more of an Eastern way of looking at it. Whereas sometimes the natural medicine people, which I used to be and I still am, but I used to be more stubborn and stuck in my ways. And it's the same thing. You can't have that type of attitude and expect growth. Now, with the anti-vaccination debate, there is sometimes, I guess, a misunderstanding about what it's even about. Is it about even vaccinations? Now, if you look at the biggest phobia in the world, one of them is needles. And I don't think it's wrong to conflate anti-vaccination fear with fear of needles, even though people will say, no, 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 I'm fine with needles, it's the vaccination. I think it's still in the subconscious, in the subcutaneous, in our subterranean levels of consciousness, our fear of needles, some people, and even the people that may consciously not fear them. There is something about skin penetration which it causes a massive amounts of anxiety and questioning. It's a big issue, skin penetration, and that was with a baby, with an infant, and vaccination. So I'm just saying that cannot be ignored. That why is it so heated, this debate about vaccinations, when if it was orally administered, would it still have that same heat? Is part of the fieriness coming from the administration by needle? Can be no, it's too big. The other thing is the funneling of information. It's downward. The authorities that know about how vaccinations work, the authorities that hold that information push it down, and nobody likes that kind of information pushed on them. So it's not even about the information itself, it's the funneling. It's the way society says, oh, I'm at the bottom receiving this, and it says, no choice, you're receiving it. We know better. That's not going to set up a situation that's going to be healthy between the vaxxers and the anti-vaxxers. So that respectful way of communicating becomes more and more strained. And maybe the debate is more about that there is someone that is pushing. And I guess more finally and thirdly, the last point I just really want to make now, it's about the way that we think we're right with our information. So, for example, look at flat earthers. Flat earthers used to say, right, the earth is flat, obviously, and it's not round. And then scientists developed theorems and said, no, look, it is round. And then that information was conveyed to the flat earthers, and then things changed. Now, I think in this situation, the scientists that really agree with vaccination, they are saying the anti-vaxxers are flat earthers, that they can't understand, they're stupid. But the anti-vaxxers are saying the exact same thing about the scientists and the vaccinators. They're saying that your version of truth is like a flat earther. You're just seeing things too empirically and you're not seeing the whole. They're saying, oh, your way of constructing a truth, which is just in this test tube environment, it's not truth, and we want to construct our own truth the way we want to. That's what they're saying. They're both calling each other flat earthers for different reasons. Now, that's where I think the schism has been created between the two groups. The schism is a construction that there is an argument. I think the pluralistic idea of them both being right is right. And it doesn't have to necessarily even be about vaccinations anymore. They have to break down what they're really arguing about.